Fairly recently, polarizing entrepreneur and CEO of Tesla, Elon Musk, hosted Saturday Night Live, and in his opening monologue, came out as autistic. In some ways, this was a big moment for the autistic community. There has been nobody with a public platform and name recognition of Elon Musk that has come out as autistic, especially while on a cultural landmark such as SNL. Because of Musk coming out as autistic, more people will become aware of what autism is, do research into it, and possibly raise the rates of diagnosis for autism in previously underdiagnosed populations. However, past this surface level reaction to Elon coming out as on a spectrum, is there something more, something deeper to this monologue that reveals an insight of autism? In viewing Elon's monologue, there is a parallel between the dynamics of power we see when we analyze the monologue, the dynamics of power and recognition of the autistic subject by the neurotypical other. And through the power dynamics of this recognition, it creates a simulation of autism, an illusory autism that is constituted only through symbolic and performative exchanges and lacks substance, enabling hierarchies of power to be upheld and the status quo of ableism to go unquestioned. In hashing all of this out, we can first look at the content of the monologue itself.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be hosting Saturday Night Live. I mean that. Sometimes after I say something, I have to say, I mean that. So people really know that I mean it. That's because I don't always have a lot of intonation or variation in how I speak, which I'm told makes for great comedy. I'm actually making history tonight as the first person with Asperger's to host SNL. Or at least the first to admit it. So I won't make a lot of eye contact with the cast tonight. But don't worry, I'm pretty good at running human in emulation mode.
Well, this is obviously discourse that isn't performed under ordinary circumstances. It's a monologue for SNL, not an everyday conversation, and we have to adjust to that context. However, it strikes me that autism here, in a way, is being commodified for those who aren't autistic, constructing the symptoms of autism, intonation, variation of speech, lack of eye contact, as a punchline to a joke for those who are predominantly not autistic. But further to jump into the comments section, I am not policing jokes, or banning comedy that relates to autistic characteristics, but rather noting that in the monologue, autism is being performed for a neurotypical audience, and through this performance, it is an act of intersubjective recognition in which an autistic subjectivity is enforced. That autism, as constituted by Elon's monologue, which is written specifically to fit within a certain cultural logic, the cultural logic of the liberal SNL viewer, is being recognized for the audience's approval, for their laughter and applause, and that this recognition, in of itself, is a display of power by which the audience holds the authority of imbuing certain aspects onto autism. So here, Elon, at the end of the clip, says that he is emulating humanity, which, while somewhat true, as autistic people don't understand social codes, it is also suggesting that, in some way, people with autism are not human, that they have to perform a humanity for the approval of the audience. While liberal, it establishes autism in the way the joke sets it up, that autistic people's difference constitutes a inhumanity, or if not a inhumanity, it makes them less human in some way, and they have to make that up through emulation, thus producing a dynamic of power where the audience recognizes that autism is, in some way, inhuman, and thus recognizes the autistic other as alien, as constituted by their difference. And to revert back to the rebuttals, yes, this is a joke, and yes, this also is a SNL monologue. And if this phenomenon was isolated to the world of jokes and late night comedy, then I think that would be a fair reaction, that it would be just a joke. However, the parallel between the act of recognition between Elon, standing in as a symbol of the autistic subject, and the audience as the able-bodied collective, with everyday conversations in real life between those same two groups, makes this a representation of a social mechanism that occurs in real life, rather than something isolated in a world of TV culture. So, How exactly does the dynamic between the audience and Elon Musk in the SNL skit reproduce itself in real life in everyday conversations? I argue we see this in the way ordinary autistics often represent their autism, with people often explaining their autism as just social awkwardness or trouble understanding social codes. While it is certainly true that autism often produces social awkwardness, it also is not what autism fundamentally is. It leaves out echolalia, delayed motor skills, deficits in speech communication, and so on. Now, is the reason for this simply that one has to simplify what a disability is in social conversation? Sure, that's probably part of it. People usually don't explain every aspect of a diagnosis when people ask about a specific disability, but I also think there's something more to this characterization of autism by autistics as social awkwardness, something that specifically ties back into the relations of power that was observed in Elon's SNL monologue. Autistics hide the more alienating aspects of their disability in order to be recognized as more human by the neurotypical other. In explaining autism, they present autism and thus themselves as autistic people in the most compatible way possible for neurotypicals to comprehend in order to encourage a recognition where the autistic other is recognized in positive terms rather than being judged negatively by the able-bodied collective. This dynamic of power between the presentation of autism and the preceding recognition of autism by the neurotypical other is one thing, and we all try and present ourselves to others in the best terms possible. But the issue I take with it is that the autism being presented is not a real autism. It's a simulation of autism, which when given enough time and publicity becomes hyperreal, and this hyperreal autism becomes indistinguishable from what we would consider true autism, which is incredibly dangerous considering the current struggle for autistic rights. By representing autism as just social awkwardness, as just an ignorance of social codes, you actively participate in an act of stunning progress towards a compassionate disability politics, instead of the simulacra of autism presented by Elon Musk and reproduced by ordinary people in everyday conversations. We need to focus on presenting autism in its entirety, portraying autism in an authentic way that doesn't simplify or dumb autism down for the able-bodied collective, but portrays autism absolutely unapologetically. The more rhetoric like Elon's SNL skit emerges and proliferates, the further away we get from an honest politics that seeks to help autistic people all over the spectrum, and the closer we get to a politics that wavers the dynamics of power and portrays a hyperreal simulation of neurodiversity, the people not on the spectrum, providing a illusory representation of autism to pass as truth, providing the conditions for autistic rights movements to be rendered inert. What do I mean by hyperreal and hyperreal autism? Hyperreal is a term coined by theorist John Baudrillard that refers to the inability to distinguish reality from simulations or copies of reality. To illustrate this, Baudrillard uses the example of Disneyland. The appeal of Disneyland for consumers is the construction of a realistic false reality that enables visitors to participate in a hyperreal reality that is more fantastic than a natural reality. In other words, a copy of reality that passes as surreal, which can give us more reality than nature can. In turning Baudrillard's concept of the hyperreal onto autism, we can again see what this video has already observed. The discourse of Musk in performing autism as purely social awkwardness captures a hyperreal image of autism for the neurotypical other, encapsulating autism in terms that are more easily comprehended, more real for the neurotypical than what autism really is, thus producing Musk's false copy of autism as a false reality that passes as real. As has already been mentioned, this hyperreal autism is disastrous, as it produces autism falsely, as merely just a social disorder that can be managed, while obfuscating the real struggles of autistic people in America: high unemployment, high suicide rates, low college attendance, and graduation. This hyperreal autism translates into the struggle of autistic individuals becoming even more hidden from individuals who are unaware. It makes the road to future iterations of disability rights movements even harder, which is counterintuitive to the whole idea of coming out as autistic in the first place. This construction of autism as hyperreal is perhaps one of the greatest challenges to creating a disability justice, and we need to start thinking long and hard about simulations of disability and how it impacts how we conceive disability in our modern society. Is there a solid example of how the simulation of autism for the power dynamics of recognition actually translates into political losses? By looking at the recent trend of autism positivity and the "Autism is my superpower" slogan, I believe we can see directly what I'm talking about in regards to how the dialogue of power, imbued into the recognition of the autistic subject by the neurotypical other, leads to harmful hyperreal autism. Greta Thunberg, an environmental advocate and one of the most well-known autistics, said in interviews that autism was her superpower, and this has been a slogan that's been co-opted by many, with YouTuber Kyle Hill coming out as autistic in a YouTube video titled "Why Autism is My Superpower." Now, this is not to downplay or criticize how people come out as publicly autistic, or to say that being positive or prideful of an autistic identity is wrong, but rather to analyze this idea of performative disability, the power dynamics of recognition, and how this plays in the discourse surrounding autism for the usage of "autism is my superpower." This slogan of "autism is my superpower" maintains the alienation of the autistic for the differentiation of autism from a shared humanity, with the autistic person's barrier to humanity merely just being transformed from something with negative connotations, stunted and fine motor skills, social struggles, to something with positive connotations, with the idea of the autistic individual now being some supercharged or superpower neurotypical, which still separates the autistic from a notion of a basic shared humanity. The autistic is still denied access to a basic humanity, but is instead lauded for their specific benefits towards capital, a neurology or a skill set that benefits tech development or engineering, and this makes autistics superpowered, while promoting a faux positivity that provides liberals feel-good identity politics, while hiding the need for a emancipatory disability movement to emerge. The continued usage of "autism is my superpower" lets people think that people with autism are in fine positions, they're living a good quality of life, when that's the opposite of the truth, and they're in need of social and legislative justice. So, even if we take this at face value, why then do autistics who are brave and self-aware enough to come out as autistic in the public sphere use this terminology, this slogan of "autism is my superpower"? While perhaps more abstract and psychoanalytic, I argue that this terminology, while perhaps well-intentioned, functionally coddles neurotypicals and allows them to ignore the neurodiverse, while also giving them, again, identity politics that lets them feel good about their personal politics through an illusion of empowerment for autistic individuals, when the reality is that they are being actively harmed through the proliferation of such terminology. The reason autistic people use such slogans is in order to be recognized by the neurotypical other in a positive lens, rather than being recognized through the too familiar lens of ableism, choosing to take on a positive stereotype of being as alien people that happen to be super smart in specific fields, promoting an understanding between neurotypicals and autistics, where an understood exchange can take place between the autistic subject and the neurotypical other. I can more than understand the desire to be recognized outside of the ableist lens of society, even if it conforms to stereotypes. However, despite my empathy for this, I cannot come across this discourse as anything but extremely critical of it. Allowing neurotypicals to recognize us in this fashion, again, actively blocks us from the means we have of fighting for substantive change, for a real justice. To pursue a disability justice, emancipatory politics, we need to present autism unapologetically and be unwavering in response to the neurotypical gaze, to the recognition of the other that alienates us, that dehumanizes us, and subjugates us. Continuing to repeat the discourse of "autism is my superpower," or the rhetoric seen in Elon's monologue, only serves to entrench its power and denies the able-bodied collective a confrontation with systemic ableism, with the widespread subjugation of people with disabilities from all walks of life. In the simplest terms, we need to come as we are, however scary that may be, and stare unrelentlessly back at the neurotypical gaze that recognizes us on unsavory terms, and unapologetically pursue an emancipatory disability justice that delivers a dignity to people with disabilities and breaks the relations of power we see today, rather than just the modifying of power we see in the discourses through Elon Musk's monologue and the Autism is my superpower slogan.